Welcome back. Over the past few years, we've all heard the same phrases in rental. It's a labour problem. Not enough technicians, not enough experience, not enough people are entering our industry. But here's the question that I want to challenge today. Is downtime really a labour problem or is it a workflow problem? Because if two rental companies have the same number of technicians and one is outperforming the other, then something deeper is happening. Here at the ARA Show, we're talking about building agile rental companies in an ever-changing and ever-increasing high-cost environment, high-expectation world from the incoming generation of customers and team members. So for that reason, today I'm joined by three leaders who see this conversation from all different sides of the industry in very different angles and perspectives. Elevator pitches are incoming. Alex, founder and president of SmartEquip, a Harvard-trained economist specializing in asset productivity, lifecycle economics, and systems thinking. Adam Kropf, senior director at product at Texada, working with rental businesses globally to modernize operations, a product specialist and master in the art of customer growth. And Jude, vice president of sales at RP Rents, a 30-year rental veteran and who's sat in nearly every seat of a rental operation. A real-world operator, integrator, and I'm sure has ERP battle scars that we can all learn from. Guys, thank you for your time and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd say labour scarcity is a worldwide pain point from America, Canada, Australia, Europe. The cost of equipment is ever, increasing, or manufacturers are increasing pricing, but sometimes rental operations, the actual rental rate is idling. To missing staff or information is really gaining significance. Jay, I want to kind of start with you. You've worked inside sales, outside sales, branch leadership, district leadership, all having various audits and the evolution of shop floors in rental operations. Is labour really the problem that you're seeing, or are we failing to support labour properly?
I think it'd probably be a combination of both. But yes, labor is a problem. Number one, it's finding people. But number two, when you find somebody, it's finding quality people. You can get a body, but we need more than bodies. We need somebody that, I think one of the big things is, the rental industry is a fast moving industry and we really want to focus on customer service. So trying to find somebody that's got the skills, but at the same time, they understand customer service, understand how important it is that the customer get a good piece of equipment. If you're talking about a tech, or if you're talking about a driver, that they're making that phone call before they get there. We're inside sales rep, outside sales reps, any of it, but finding somebody that is good at what they do and understands customer service is very important in the rental industry.
You said too, keeping those good people. A lot of the newer techs have grew up on computers and I can't function without tech environment, people around my generation anyways, that then we're needing to keep these systems up to date, and it's more of a requirement of happiness for these techs as well. Do you think sometimes hiding behind the labour shortage that we need to identify these insufficient processes?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a big thing. We have to realize that, when I started in the industry 30 years ago, we did everything on pen and paper, whether it was delivery log or, whatever. But in today's world, the workforce that's coming in are, younger people that grew up with, computers from the time they've been born, or, some of us sitting here were pre-Google, but these people that we're hiring are not pre-Google.
Yeah.
So, or whatever you want to say, pre-internet. So it's important that you give them the same tools they're used to. Some of these people that you're hiring now probably have had smartphones since they've been 9-10 years old.
Alex, from an economic standpoint, what's the real cost of this downtime that operators don't really understand or maybe underestimate?
I think if you look today at the understanding of technology impact on downtime, and maybe echoing what you said earlier, there's a much higher understanding that technology itself isn't just there to make the technician more productive, which is correct, but as a consequence of that, you get higher uptime. If somebody can do a repair in 4 hours, where previously took them 8, you've got 4 hours of additional uptime. And the economics are really interesting because for that additional uptime, there's no additional cost typically. So it's a little bit like you go into a hotel and there's a room that's not being used and you walk in and you say, give me that room for $200. 199 of those dollars go straight to the bottom line. So that additional incremental margin of uptime you get out of that, which is typically now technology enabled, that's a high margin benefit.
For sure. So if two companies have the same tech count, why does one produce 20% more uptime?
I think there are several reasons. There are other factors playing in that tend to be magnifiers of technology. Some of them are labor preparedness. Again, you spoke to that, I think, very eloquently. To what extent can people really use this technology? Others, though, are sort of more indirect effects. So one of the things we see, we do a lot of work in North America, we do a lot of work in Europe, and we also do a lot of work in Japan. And what we're finding is the impact of technology in Japan tends to be higher because equipment age is greater. The average age of fleet is there, which means that the use of parts and service is much greater over the life of the equipment, but especially as it gets older, that goes up exponentially. So that means that technology has more opportunities each day of its cycle to have an impact there, both to make labor more effective, but then again, as I mentioned earlier, to improve uptime. So you have to look at some of the exogenous facts, such as equipment age. You have to see what type of fleet is there. There are some types of equipment where uptime is absolutely vital to being productive, whereas others are not. So there are a lot of other factors that drive the equation here.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. And one of the other things that I've heard a lot from our customers is around, it's not just like, okay, I turn an 8-hour repair into 4 hours and now I can do 2 repairs in a day. It's also being first time fix.
That's
so
right.
Getting out there, do I have the right parts? Do I know the history of the machine? So when I arrive, because sometimes it'll be an hour drive from your shop to the job site, you get there and you don't have the parts.
Yeah.
Or you don't have visibility to who is the parts nearby. And being able to make sure that you get those parts in a timely manner, so you actually get them on the machine, because then it goes from, okay, now we need to come back another day, and now are you sending another machine, right? So with your example of the hotel room, now you're tying up 2 hotel rooms.
Correct.
When, with having the right information at the right time, you'd be able to utilize both of them. So
I think to add to that, from a technology perspective, one of the things important to get more efficiency, to get more uptime, is having technology be able to plan what either your drivers are delivering. We're using we're exploring AI to help with delivery, or from the shop side that the mechanic's not floundering, not knowing where to go, that you're putting a plan in front of them. Just like we ask sales reps to have a plan and work the plan, I think it's important to use technology to plan what your techs do on a daily basis.
There's one other factor I think that's really interesting, and that is the technology evolution within the rental company. And there are 2 phases to everything. Usually, and I don't know if you find that with people on the rental management side, and certainly on your experience in the operations side, usually the first step is, let's use technology to do everything that we did previously, but now automate it. So it's exactly the same workflow as previously, but now it's on a screen. And sometimes that's a step backwards. Just think back to the microfiche. When you went from book to microfiche, which is an early version of going from paper to glass, that was a horrible step backwards for everybody. They became less efficient, right? Now that's an extreme example, but usually the first thing is to say, let's use the same workflow we had and put it on a computer. Then usually as a second step, and that's where companies vary, they say, well, wait a minute. Now that it's digital, now that it is on the screen, we can do things we couldn't do before. So the first, if you do it right, sort of steepens the productivity curve. The second one shifts the whole curve, because that's when innovation happens. So a lot of the differences between 2 companies using the same technology is, are they in camp A still or in camp B? And one thing, I'd be curious to see what you think, one thing we find usually is that you can't leapfrog to camp B. You normally have to go, we've often tried to sell our solution by saying, look at all these things you'll be able to do. And say, well, let's just do what we're doing anyway, but let's do it more efficiently. And then from there, normally you have the innovation. So it depends a lot on where that company sits on that evolution curve.
yeah, I would definitely say that echoes our experience as well.
Yeah.
10 years ago, mobile apps for service techs was pretty rare. A lot of people were still paper. And one of our experiences was riding alongside techs. It was really understanding kind of what their problem was. Like, they didn't want technology, right? They're like, I've been doing this for 30 years. I don't want technology. But once we said, okay, well, what do you dislike about your day-to-day life? And then how can we mimic that? It even went so far as when we changed our interface on some of our pieces to look like the printed paper work order that they used to have. So like
Comfortable.
the customer is on the right, the asset is on the left, your parts and labor and services are in the middle at the bottom. Like even that little change, when they picked it up, it felt familiar. So that's really the step of getting them from paper into a digital process. And then, like you said, that enables so much more opportunity. Now you can actually understand real time, where are your technicians? You're not just giving them a stack of papers on a clipboard and saying, see you in 3 days, right? So it's, oh, you finished early. We have this other urgent customer need. You're nearby. There's this other problem. Really turns from like a once a day or once a week dispatch to a real-time dispatch. Yeah. And that's where those margins come along.
I'd say with this in mind, our industry is presenting this less techs with less hands-on knowledge, but success in our industry depends on getting the right info and the right person. So Adam, when you're speaking with a lot of these progressive rental businesses, like you said, potentially some might have been a bit hard-headed at the start, or they wanted to see that physical copy on a screen, are these top performers seeking more bodies or better processes?
I would say typically they're looking to make sure that their bodies are just being fully utilized. Like that's step one, is understanding what are my people doing every day. And that spans across your reps, your rental coordinators, your technicians and drivers. And then it's, okay, now that I can see what they're doing, how can I help them be more effective? So it's understanding where are they going in their day? What is the waste that they have to do? And then digitizing those processes. Some of them come with AI and being able to do some predictive route planning, as Jay was talking about, or it can come with just the basics of understanding, okay, this is now overdue. Before, that would be something you realize the next day. Now we can say, okay, it's now overdue in the afternoon. How can I make it right for that customer before they call me? And being proactive to really create that great customer experience.
So from a rental management product standpoint and looking at it from a retention aspect for our team and solving headaches, so they are more efficient, enjoying their work and actually delivering potentially future, enhanced revenue for their rental businesses, replacing the calling, the waiting, the handwritten notes, the, mobile platforms that you offer at Texada can eliminate these daily frustrations for renting equipment and just to the shop floor in general for their operations. So is modern technology now an expectation for technicians? Are you seeing that?
I would say that most modern rental companies are requiring their technicians to have some level of technology, whether it's starting with the basics, like a digital work order through the mobile application, going more advanced by leveraging telematics to see, okay, what was happening right before this downtime? Was the scissor lift overloaded? Was it at an angle? They have all these different sensors on them that can help you understand why did something break? Because that could be a clue to help you service it the first time. So I'd say that's where some of the leading companies are kind of leveraging all the machine data as well as the history data. Speaking to what you asked about before with just removing some of their headaches, the older technicians, they hated two things the most. One is the phone calls from the shop saying, what parts did you actually put on this work order? Because it's handwritten and it's illegible. And now it's 2 weeks later, it's been sitting in a file folder, and now it's time to bill the customer. So I hated getting those calls because they don't remember, right? That's just not realistic. The other side of it is when they're working on a piece of equipment and they're blind to what the last technician did. So now they're calling the shop and saying, hey, can you pull all the work orders for asset 1, 2, 3 and tell me what was the last work we did on it? Because it looks like this, but if, for example, it's a failing gasket, but if we replace that gasket 3 times, it's not a gasket problem, it's a pressure problem.
Yeah.
So we got to look somewhere else in here. So help give them the history right on their mobile device, cut down those calls, which made them much happier.
But I think there's also another part to your question, which is it the expectation that techs are technology savvy, right? I think there's also a reverse of that. It's hard to get service technicians. And unlike, I think, when we all started, pre-Google comment, unlike then, where there was a pushback, these people became techs because they didn't want to deal with this world. I think nowadays you actually need to have technology to attract people into the field. I think there's a much higher expectation. Back when we started our company, there was no Amazon that you used when you were at home and then ran to work and had to use and didn't get to use it. That's the case now. So I think it is a way to attract service technicians.
So Jay, with all of that in mind, with actually running a rental operation, do you see tech as a really good recruitment tool in what you're offering as an opportunity for future talent coming into your business?
Yes, I think especially with the younger talent. I mean, I think that's a necessity. It's not a want, it's a necessity with the younger group. I mean, think about it. You know, like I said, these kids were probably born with a smartphone or got a smartphone at a very young age. On top of that, you know, even if you want to go work on a car nowadays, you can't really do it if you don't have a code scanner. So, I mean, it's just the time that we live in. I mean, we have to embrace the technology, and we have to use the technology to our advantage. And I mean, I think that's one thing I wanted to touch on something you said, and you know, you being in the rental business, you understand this greatly. You know, it seems like every year we're seeing, you know, and I hope I'm not going too far back, but you see that the cost go up for equipment. I mean, whether it be the cost of steel's going up, whether it be in the U.S. right now, it's dealing with the tariffs. Every year, the cost of this equipment is going up and up and up, and so you're aging your equipment out a little bit more. But on the flip side, and I said, coming from the rental business, you know this. The rates aren't climbing on the same trajectory.
Yeah. Which means downtime has become a lot more expensive. The opportunity cost is just gone up.
Definitely, because I think we'll see, without having these systems as well, we might actually see technicians leave rental businesses to go somewhere that is accommodating this for them.
Yeah, very much so.
Alex, globally, are younger technicians, I guess, forcing this industry to modernise? Like, obviously, you starting SmartEquip. How have you seen the whole mindset, like you're saying, this adoption of change curve, how people at the start, there's, you know, skepticism, then they move to being a lot more comfortable, and then potentially realising they don't know what they don't know. How have you seen the whole industry evolve from just a technology mindset, having started SmartEquip, you know, quite some years ago?
I think early on, there was a fair bit of pushback, and there was among the management layer of rental companies, especially large ones, there was a very strong conviction that their techs wouldn't want to use our technology. And so that was their big fear. They said, what if we do this? And we said, let's try it. And we did very similar to what you were describing. We mapped out the original interface in a way that was instantly familiar to a technician, quite often in a way that wasn't familiar to management. They didn't quite know how to navigate it because they were not in the field. So they assumed, therefore, the technician doesn't either. So we just started pilot projects, and they saw their own technicians do two things. One is they became a lot more efficient, and then they really loved the tool and would quite often say, don't take this away, we need to do this. And it showed in a lot of productivity as well. So there was that pushback initially, but it was really the technician layer that persuaded management to go in this direction, which was great. It took a long time because we had to get through all the pushback hurdles and the doubt, but it worked. In Europe, it was quicker, but it was also quite a bit later. So we started the company in 2000. By the time we really got started in Europe, it was about 2010, 2012. And there, everybody was far more open to mobile device-based technology. Interestingly enough, they were already there, but also to anything telematics related and so forth, because in Australia, by the way, it's the same way. Telematics was accepted far earlier, maybe because of geographic spread, than it was in the US. And what we're seeing in Japan is actually sort of between the two. It is still cautious, very, very cautious. Technicians do very well with technology. Management struggles in putting together, they're very, very good with KPIs, key performance indicators, when it comes to workflow and everything else. As soon as there's a digital component to the solution, they get very, very cautious about putting hard numbers to it. So we're on the cusp of that, and that took us a while to get through, but the willingness today to go digital is much, much higher. One thing in Japan you find is that every rental company has a DX officer as a chief digital officer. That's something that happened in the last 5 years really. So there clearly is now a need to move forward because they see it in their own workforce.
Well, you're definitely seeing all sides of the coin starting in 2000. I was born 2 years later, so there you go.
Yeah, that's not nice.
It's interesting that you're mentioning a lot of companies are having like digital officers.
Yeah.
I'm seeing more and more heavy equipment companies now having like director of AI.
Yes.
Right. So it's not just like the overall layer of technology. They've had that. They have technology teams.
Yeah.
Now they have somebody who's dialed into specifically, okay, how can we leverage AI and some of the emerging opportunities during a time of such technological like acceleration that we're going through right now.
That role actually come up today in an episode I did earlier, calling it a CAIO. Instead of CEO, they're having a Chief AI Officer. And they think that's going to be the biggest role in the future of any organization, whether that's rental, Microsoft, Google, just across the world. So if we talk about the holistic tech stack, bringing all three of you guys together and merging it into one question, the ERP is where all rental companies' lives and information lives now. It's kind of the nucleus of how we just approach our lives. We're very reliant on them in 2026. Adam, why is the ERP alone not enough today in 2026?
Yeah, I'd say that there's a lot of nuance that happens in the rental industry. So just being a good ERP in a business that moves as fast, and something Jay mentioned earlier is, until you get into the rental industry, you don't realize that it's a service. It's a service business. It's not a product. It's not sell it and it shows up like maybe a dealer would. It's very much, okay, is the equipment on time? Is it available? Is it at the right price? And that just moves too fast for a standalone ERP. So using something that's purpose-built and layering on those end customer workflows, those end user workflows that are dialed into the nuances of the rental business, you just can't be without it now.
Let me add one thing to that. And so our two companies are in close partnership. And some of the rate of change, let me just give you one example for that. Your typical customer will have at least dozens, if not hundreds, of different OEMs in their fleet, manufacturers in their fleet. And on top of that, another layer of several hundred suppliers. All of these suppliers constantly change what an individual spare part is called and what that individual spare part number might look like. And the reason they do that, by the way, is because they have their own suppliers for parts. And if they switch from one to the other, they've got to track that. And so there's a lot of confusion there. And that may be for a $5 part or a $50 part. But that overhead, that cost impact of getting that part wrong or taking a long time to find it is 10, 20, 100, 1,000 times that $5 or $500 because every day of downtime is really pulled in through that. So it's very, very difficult when you have the system of record, which is what you guys prepare, to then depend on human labor to constantly keep this up to speed. There's always going to be a lot of an error rate. You're familiar with this error rate and the impact. And so you need something. So the reason we decided when we built our system never to become a system of record ourselves, or let alone compete with other system of records, but to integrate with them, like our two companies are. The idea is that when an employee at one of their customers tries to order a part that has been replaced, it's called supersession, and it doesn't exist in your item master, so you can't even place that order out of the ERP. You now have to go do the research. We instantly add it, and it'll be correct for that serial number and so forth. So automating that horizontal workflow is where you really start supercharging the ERP system, because it will know before its user knows what the right part number is, or if this one is an obsolete part number. So that's where you get multiplier effects by combining the technologies.
You just mentioned two terms, and one was system of record and
Yes.
the other was integration. So you've probably already answered my question, but if you only have a system of record, what else is missing?
Well, there's a workflow that uses the information that's in that system of records to do things. And that can be creating rental contracts and a lot of the services that you were just mentioning. So there's a lot going on there. There's another system of record in our world that we depend on, and that's the supplier system of record. And just like rental companies have a lot of different rental management systems or may have different ways of implementing one and the same solution, suppliers have hundreds of different versions of how they integrate dozens of different ERP systems. So somehow that information that sits on the left-hand side of this sort of map has to flow into the right-hand side, and then for the transaction it goes the other direction. So it really is these system of records that need to be kept alive, because if that gets populated wrong with the wrong information, then also the workflow that their system, for example, is creating is polluted with the wrong data. So you really have to find a way of getting all that data that's just getting more and more voluminous to find its way into the right workflow.
And if you want to talk about people,
Yeah.
let's talk about trying to call one of these part suppliers and get a human on the phone.
Yeah.
I mean, it's no matter what you're doing. I mean, you know, so much stuff is going to AI or going to, here's a recording, push. I can help you here, but I mean, you know, you imagine some of these texts and stuff. They're in a hurry and they can't physically get a hold of somebody. So that would be huge. That you guys understand. You know, you go ahead and change it from the super session and stuff.
And you only have to get a very, very small, very low error rate for it to have impact. So if you order 20 parts and only 5% of them are wrong, you have equipment downtime, which means if there are several pieces of equipment and there's a workflow there, a whole project may come to a standstill. So again, people still look at how can I get that $50 part for $30? That's not the question to ask. How do I get that misorder of that part not to stop, have you bleed tens of thousands of dollars potentially?
Alex, you said that SmartEquip provides, this clear path for techs, ensuring that they don't order from unapproved vendors, which in turn, I guess, reduces the back office issues and ensures that your invoices are matched correctly, and then Texada can communicate the serial numbers to SmartEquip, and which then can identify the exact parts and the support that's needed with that associated, SKU. You've described SmartEquip as an intelligence layer, but what does that actually mean in plain language?
So it's in today's world, it is interesting that we chose back then to call it intelligence. What we've done historically is not intelligence of what we think about today with AI, right? The intelligence here is tying the information in his system for his user to create the right workflow. So I'll give you an example. Your employee will just have to put in, you mentioned asset 1, 2, 3. We have that in every example we ever use. So asset 1, 2, 3, which is painted or decaled on the side of the equipment, because we read their system, we know that that's a very old scissor lift, a JLG 1932 E2 with a serial number 54321. Okay, and if you want to go ahead and replace that coil, you want to get a 20 volt coil, not a 24 volt coil, because that wouldn't fit. So you're preventing, you're ensuring that the order that gets placed, or the search even to start with in your own inventory, is the correct one for the correct part. That then gets brought over to the supplier. And as you said earlier, it's the approved supplier, and not approved by us, but approved by the rental company decision makers, by your parts, and that could be regionally specific and so forth. So the intelligence is really in that it's a static intelligence historically that ties that local information into the transaction flow, into the service workflow, and so forth. Where we're going today is obviously what we call intelligence nowadays, which is the AI side of it, right? Given that we have that, and given that we're sitting on the largest collection of service documentation, parts documentation anywhere in the industry, instead of serving up PDF files, now we should be able to actually let people read these files through their own language models and so forth. So there's a lot of stuff now that we're working on and we're partnering on that uses a much higher level of intelligence than what we used to mean by that.
So from my perspective, I guess looking at the potential optimal outcome of all of these things paired together, there's truly monumental time savings from eliminating the handwritten orders. The search and order process becomes seamless, and it's a digital workflow instead of going through pen and paper like we have in the past. But Jay, when rogue ordering happens in a rental business, who feels it first? Is it the ops, the sales, or is it flowed on to the customer eventually?
I mean, that's a tough question. Who feels it first? I mean, you're gonna feel it in your back office because you may have to open up another vendor, or you may feel it in your accounting side because you used a credit card. They're just going to get it quick and do a credit card, but then there again something happens and it slows down, so it affects the customer. I mean, I don't have a clear direct answer, but I think there's a lot of little fingers that, by doing that rogue parts ordering, it can actually head in many different directions and affect everybody. I know I'm not directly answering your question, but there's a lot to it.
Well, and there are different levels of seriousness. I mean, it can be very serious if you do a part that's not qualified, certified, shouldn't be there. It could be a safety issue, then it can definitely expose the customer in that sense. It could be lower reliability for the equipment itself, which will affect everybody. These errors are rarely about having spent an extra 10% on a part. They're usually the consequences downstream of what can happen operationally, what can happen safety-wise, and what can happen with warranty fulfillment. And it really touches so many parts of the equipment life cycle that people, the more advanced rental companies, have really stopped paying attention to that small little savings margin and have really looked at the operating consequences.
So what were you talking about? Like you said on the 2032 E2, that was a 20 volt system.
Yeah.
Now everything's 24 volt.
Yeah.
So if they go rogue, that part's not going to work.
Yeah.
For sure. We're kind of operating as well in an ever-changing environment of online expectations, potentially how our B2C personal experience is then affecting our B2B work experience as well. And rental customers now expect customized, easy experiences that are seamless. Jay, from customer expectations, how have you seen they have changed, quite dramatically, and how has that shift happened in the last 5 years of what you need to provide the customer now as just a rental business in general?
Well, I think it's going to depend on the customer. And I think that's something that we've always got to remember in the rental business, that going back to, it's a people business. People do business with people they like, and we have to understand what each person likes. I mean, when I left the field in 2015, I was back in the field in 2018. Some stuff was done via text back then, but back in the day it was done via phone. In today's world, there are going to be some people, and we've kind of touched on this. I don't know if I'm supposed to say it this way, but with the generations, some of the younger people are used to being able to go on an app and order something. So there are people out there that want to order something via an app. There's going to be the guy or gal that's been doing this for 35 years. They want to pick up the phone and call the sales rep, or they want to pick up the phone and call the coordinator. So you've got to be flexible. There's a wide multitude, and you've got to figure out what that customer likes to do.
Meaning where they're at.
Yeah, and be able to do what they need, or what they like.
For sure. Adam, digital experiences, like we're saying, are kind of table stakes now in 2026, but are rental companies balancing this high tech while satisfying, like you mentioned, the relationship side, the high touch point side that we still need to optimally perform in rental even in 2026?
Yeah, I think Jay was spot on that you need to have options for people, especially if you look at the heavy equipment industry and construction industry and rental as well. There's a lot of generational shifts of like the next generations coming in, and they're looking for those digital tools, and they want to do business with people who provide them those digital tools. And then you have the legacy operators who definitely want that relationship. So one thing we've seen a lot with the e-commerce of rental with our customers is over time, the amount of new orders, so first time orders through the e-commerce platform, is going up. First, we saw it where people were reordering. So they build a relationship with their sales rep. They know when they need to do this job, this is the type of equipment that I need, because they've built a relationship. Their sales rep has given them the right information. So they order it. They're happy with it. They're going to repeat that. The reorder going digital happened the last couple of years, but it's over the more recent term, the first time order is starting to go up because they're doing more research themselves, and they're leveraging tools like large language models like ChatGPT or Gemini, and they're doing the research of what they need for that new generation, saying, okay, I know that this is the specs of the equipment I need. I can see that through the mobile app, or I can see that through the website. I can click buy now, put in my credit card, and it's going to show up at the right time, and with a lot of transparency through that process.
So do you have any key tips, tools, tricks that you have for recommendations of balancing this tech and relationships now going forwards?
Well, I think Jay's spot on when he said that you need to be able to reach somebody. So it's give them a digital tool, give them the e-commerce experience they're looking for on your website, while also having right at top priority is that phone number. If I call that phone number, will somebody answer? So having the team on the other side who's able to respond to those inquiries and be able to move them forward, having that trusted salesperson that they have that relationship with, will create those relationships long term.
Look, I think in terms of tips and tricks, I gave a presentation in June of last year at the European Rental Association, and the topic for that presentation was how do we pick a digital strategy as a rental company, right? And it was interesting. And my advice on that was the first thing you have to do is you really have to understand your equipment life cycle, because what is it you want to affect? Nothing has changed about rental or the rental business model because of technology. You're still trying to do the same thing. You're trying to maximize uptime. You're trying to make your labor force very efficient. You're trying to decrease the total cost of ownership, and there are subcomponents to all of these. So what you're trying to do is still optimize all of those things, and then you have to start mapping these solutions against these challenges or against the challenges that you have, and understand fully what is it that I'm solving. So what we see, for example, in Europe, some of the large rental companies that we've worked with, they started a digital transformation and project, and it usually has separate chapters. So quite often they start, first of all, with the front ending that you referred to, which is we want to support the customer. And that's really there to enhance revenue. How do we get revenue more efficiently and effectively by having a larger customer footprint, by doing things interactively, in addition to the way we've been doing business so far. Then the next stage was, let's go to the operations side, to parts and service in particular. How do we bring down the total cost of ownership, right? So you really need to understand the full economic model of why am I in rental, what are the options, where do I have the greatest challenges, and then start a strategy that really selects among that toolkit of solutions to go after these economic sort of components of all this.
For sure. Something that I'm really interested in, Alex, and in some instances in markets, equipment costs have doubled around the world, and you can't, I guess, control the purchase price. And like we're saying, we're also not increasing that rental rate going along with the associated increase in cost, but we can control the parts and the service efficiency. That's something we can control. From your perspective, what does this mean for lifestyle discipline that we need to have, conversely, between 10 years ago to today?
So my favorite example on that whole topic is looking at the Japanese rental industry. Rates are incredibly low, equipment keeps getting more expensive, and the only way to be profitable is to hold that equipment far longer than we would in North America or in Europe. Okay, so it's not unusual at all to see equipment that's 10 years old. Strangely enough, it still looks brand new because there's a whole different discipline both on the service side but also among the customers, that they treat that equipment very gently. Nobody in the US says be gentle, it's a rental, right? But if it's owned by somebody else in that culture, you actually do use it more carefully. In any event, they have to keep it for a long time. And quite often, if you look horizontally, even by the time they're going to sell it, it still has not been profitable across its life until they sell it. So really, in some cases, rental becomes the production of used equipment because that's where profit kicks in, right? So that's very interesting. But as a consequence, the impact of technology there is far greater. Again, because when equipment is older, then the use for example, the solutions we're giving them just goes up exponentially. So for every linear increase in equipment age, you get an exponential increase in the number of times you do repair and the number of times you need a part and so forth. So the opportunity for changing the economics there really go up tremendously. So that's the kind of shift, and that's really where the discipline comes from. It's not that it's a labor force discipline, it's now a discipline to bring those costs down by using these kinds of digital solutions and really shifting the whole profitability of it.
Are you saying there's no translation to nothing parties like a rental in Japan?
No translation?
Yeah, in the U.S. you hear nothing parties like a rental. You don't hear that in Japan?
Like a rental, yeah. That'll be the next module.
As soon as, and we're all bad for it too, as soon as you drive it out of the airport in the Hertz rent-a-car, it's flat out.
Done it, right.
So we're, even working in rental, we're all probably pretty bad for it. But it's such a fascinating area across all the various media that I see in articles, magazines, all these different strategies globally on how people approach rental. Like you said, they mightn't even be generating revenue until that equipment sale date. And they're seen as a reseller of equipment to produce their profit in their rental business. So, but with the areas of Japan and Europe outperforming us, or in the US, on the aging fleet management, would you say it is due to technology, or is it just due to how they run their operation?
First of all, I wouldn't say outperforming. I think, so to take a step back, what is interesting is you see these very, very different ways of aging equipment in Japan and so forth. But it still is exactly the same equipment life cycle. It's still the same way of calculating total cost of ownership. It's the same way of doing things like financial utilization. All the KPIs are the same. The requirements are different. The reason they hold the equipment longer is because rates are low and equipment is expensive. So there is no way to be profitable. Right. The other thing is a very saturated market. They were in rental long before, when the US was in the 20 to 25% rental penetration rate. Japan was in the 80s already, 75, 80%, 85, which is partly what contributed to rates being so low. But that's what really, that's what shifted the envelope. That's why they have to keep it longer. But the calculation is exactly the same calculation we make here that we make in Europe. It just, the variables themselves have different values to them, meaning that you have to age it longer to be profitable there than you do here.
Sure.
Now, that doesn't mean that you would, therefore, if you aged it longer here, it would be even more profitable. It wouldn't be. There are different crossover points because there's so many variables you take into account.
But with that being said, though, do you not see that trend happening in the U.S. as well? I mean, where we were but when you started SmartEquip to where we are today, I think we as an industry are keeping equipment longer than we used to as well
And I think
in the U.S.
And I think that's partly for the reasons you mentioned earlier, which is it keeps getting more expensive. TCO keeps going up and outstepping rental revenue on it and profitability on it. So it becomes a requirement. So it becomes a little bit more Japan-like, right? But those are the factors that are driving it. The logic is still the same. And that same logic says in the US we may keep it for 6 years, where in Japan we may keep that asset for 12.
Sure.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest challenges there is that, like you said, as the equipment gets older, the amount of repairs you do for it is going to be even higher.
Yes.
Right. So that's where it loops back to like the technology. You have to be on point. You have to be monitoring that equipment. You have to be doing your proactive maintenance so that if you, much like we talked about, maybe mistreating rental equipment, if you're mistreating your own fleet by not doing enough preventative maintenance, because I'm only going to have it for 5 years. So the likelihood that I'm going to inherit the problem that comes from not doing my oil changes as consistently as I need to be, maybe not using OEM parts as much as I should, because I'm going to sell it off in 5 years. If I'm keeping that thing for 8-10 years, I'm going to be the one getting the consequences for it, which really changes some of the behavior and the discipline in the rental industry to make those decisions earlier on. Say, this is a 10-year investment, and I'm going to treat a 10-year investment much different than I do a 5-year.
And that became visible, never by design, but during COVID.
That's what I was going to say.
So we were shocked. So in the beginning, when COVID hit, everybody thought the world was going to come to a standstill, and equipment manufacturing basically came to a halt, right? Then everybody was surprised within months that rentals started picking up again. Within 60 days, or 60 to 90 days, it was at the same level where it had dropped off in March of 2020. And then within another 60 days, it was back on the original trend line. But now there was no equipment to be had. So suddenly equipment in the North American context was starting to really age, which was fascinating, right? And what we see every month, well, actually every day, but we look at it once a month, is parts consumption in the industry. And that was starting to skyrocket because with every month of additional aging, in an environment that doesn't treat its fleet all that well, or certainly with a 5, 6, 7 year expectation, all of a sudden that was going up, as were service events and everything else. So it was really interesting to see how dependent it is. And then when post-COVID, another couple years later, the pendulum swung the other way. Now there's all that equipment that these rental companies pre-committed to. Now it's coming into the market and they may not even want it anymore because now we have an oversupply of it. Now you're going into a very, very young fleet, and now parts consumption just really starts coming down. So it's really interesting. That's a very artificial example of how the North American rental industry was forced into a Japan-like environment without treating their fleet in a Japan-like kind of way.
Yeah, it's so interesting that reluctance of not outsourcing responsibility onto someone because I'm only holding it for 5 years, completely changing the mindset, the behaviors and the habits of a rental business. But Jay, operationally, what separates, from your perspective, a disciplined, proactive operator from an unstructured, reactive one?
I mean, I think a lot of that is you got to look in the future. I mean, you got to see what's coming down the pike. I mean, whether it be from, whether it be taking care of your equipment because you're going to keep it longer, or whether it be, on a sales side, understanding what projects are coming up and being on the forefront of that. Or, now we've kind of talked about it. I know we, at RP Rents, we're doing a lot of business with, we're getting a lot of business from these data centers. Data centers are popping up everywhere. That drives a lot of our business. So, that's feeding into something, and we've kind of taken the approach that, hey, these tools are out there, and we're going to start using them. I mean, we're starting to explore different areas of AI. We're starting to explore different, software enhancements. But I think that the big thing is, back in the day of the rental guy, you were kind of reactionary, but I think you've got to become proactive and look forward and start, looking, 1, 2, 5 years in the future, not just, what's coming next month.
Adam, from the data side, with all of this in mind, what metrics do you recommend that rental operators should be tracking daily to find the true ROI of their equipment, their team, and just their holistic operation in general?
Yeah, I'd say there's the basics that every rental company can be tracking: utilization, return on cost, stuff like that. I think some of the more advanced ones are looking at how fast can I turn equipment from return to rental ready? So it's really those going from, when I started 11 years ago with the rental industry, A lot of the time we're talking days, right? So it's returned, it sits in the yard, it's a paper inspection, it gets put in a folder, it eventually gets flipped. So then people are, instead of looking at what's in the system, they're just going in the yard and saying, okay, what could be ready, and then figuring it from there. Now that we talked about how the processes are being digitized, now they can see in the system the real-time status of it, and they trust it more because they're doing digital inspections instead of relying on paper ones. From the time it gets returned to being rental ready and it actually being rental ready we're talking hours for the best rental companies, because that enables you to put on another contract for the next day as opposed to losing an entire 24-hour period. And that would drop, that increases your utilization by 3% right there, just having it ready. So looking at the speed of which they're doing that, and then also making sure that you're finding the damage as early as possible. So we talked about how rental equipment can be abused. Finding that damage that the customer does when you're still with the customer is also hugely important for making sure you can collect it from the right customer. Because the worst experience is you've just sent it out on a rental, they see it, and they're like, hey, this has damage on it. And then number one, it may affect their ability to operate the equipment. It could be a safety issue if it's aerial, or more importantly, they could get blamed for that damage. And now you're chasing the wrong customer for that damaged equipment, and you're never going to get paid for it from either the original customer who damaged it or the customer who actually didn't, but you're trying to chase them for it. And that can really burn the relationships that we were talking about earlier. And that's where leveraging some of the technology like AI, one of the things we're launching here at the rental show is our AI damage detection. So scanning everybody's rental return reports, whether it's a pickup or an in yard, and finding those damage through our specially trained AI models so that the damage is found within minutes. So the customer's still on the site, your driver's still on the site, and you're saying, hey, I found this, let's talk about it. So it follows the same process as you do today when your driver spots a damage, and it's a conversation, and then you work with your sales rep to say, okay, are we going to comp this one? How serious is it? And then you can maintain that relationship as opposed to chasing them later on.
And I think there's a nuanced version of this as well, which we're starting to see. There were really, again, 3 chapters to the whole how quickly can we turn this around thing, which is so critical in rental. When is it going to be available? So the first one was, hey, if we can do more rental, let's just buy more equipment. That's sort of early rental industry days when there was a lot of margin and so forth. And then it became increasingly clear, no, you really need to get more rental out of the same assets that you have, as opposed to just adding some. So that's really what's driving utilization. And then there was a bit of an overreaction early on, where several rental companies, and actually one well-known rental company with a lot of outlets in the US, started overemploying service technician. And they said, we need to have a pit crew model. The fleet comes back, we've got all these guys coming in, turn it around, it's there. And while that improved the financial yield on asset, the cost of service techs went up so high that it was actually an overkill. So they quickly pulled back that pit crew approach. What's really interesting now is what AI is adding into this, is it can be nuanced in terms of starting to have predictive demand, meaning that it can start telling you, look, you should turn this one around quickly. Let that one sit a little longer because that's the one that's more likely to be rented next, or it has a higher margin, so focus on that. So you can become more nuanced, not necessarily in repairing everything more quickly, but in terms of how you decide which asset should get the earliest attention.
You know, I think that becomes more important. You're talking about returning the equipment quicker, getting it back, getting it up and going. I mean, it's picking up the equipment, getting it back, because, there still is, no matter, we can sit here and talk about technology, we can talk about digital, we can talk about AI, whatever, but there's still a human element to this business. This business is very human, very human based. And as a rental guy, rental operator, the last thing you want to say to anybody is no. So you're always looking for a way to say yes. Yes, you talk to any old rental person, you always say yes. So we got to find ways to say yes.
I'll jump into some spicy questions and buzzword topics, and something that you guys both mentioned before. So we'll start talking about AI that everyone's interested in nowadays, and we'll probably have to put on our alfoil hats for this topic anyways. But Adam, what does embedded AI actually look like to you today in 2026? Obviously, you've mentioned this implementation of the photos, picking up things instantly, but what are you really excited about that you're doing with Texada and AI at the show?
Yeah, I think that there's two sides. So I talked about the AI damage detection, and that's definitely along our theme of making your operators superheroes. So, right? So it can take a long time. It can take 30 years to get 30 years of experience evaluating equipment, having conversations. But if we can enable your early employees to be almost as effective as those long tenured employees by leveraging data that's in the system, providing recommendations around, okay, which parts, what is a likely service outcome for this type of equipment, and then being able to say, much like you were talking about, which equipment should be serviced next. So we've got 10 pieces down, I've got 5 technicians. So the best way to get the most out of your current labor pool is to say, I'm going to repair the equipment that is the highest in demand, highest yield, and leveraging those. So that's, you will have dispatchers and service managers who just intrinsically know their fleet. They know these are my high utilization category and classes. But if you can surface that information, that when they take a day off, your utilization doesn't fall off. I hear this a lot with especially dispatchers who know their customer bases, who know kind of which parts of the city you need to deliver what time of day. When they take a day off, their driver effectiveness drops off, or it used to. So it's kind of crazy how you can, that used to be such a big issue. And as you can move to digitizing that information and enabling any dispatcher to step in and be almost as effective as that long-term employee, that creates just so much more opportunity, and allows, like, I worked with a customer who said that he has not had a day off in years. And if he wanted a day off, he would work the night to plan all the scheduling, and then he could take the next day off, but he would still have to like come in early the subsequent day to then do the same thing for the next day because they didn't do it in advance. So enabling the team to be, have that periods of rest by leveraging technology and help them be more effective every single day.
Jay, you've been doing a lot with your operation RP Rents in leveraging AI in your dispatching software to maximize your potential revenues in high stakes sectors, like you said, with a lot of the data center work that you guys are doing. How have these enhancements really shown up from a rental revenue standpoint in this initial phase that you've rolled out?
We're working towards it. We haven't got too deep into it yet, but we're looking for it. And I think one of the big things we're looking for, our main operation is in the Chicago area. And I don't know how much you've been to Chicago, but the traffic, the trying to get around there is something that's crazy. I mean, to try to combat that, we actually run 3 shifts of trucks. We run a first shift. We run a second shift that starts in the afternoon, and we run a third shift. We have drivers that come in at midnight, and then our first and second shift guys, or our first shift guys, start coming in at 1:30 in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, and it kind of staggers from there. So like I said, we haven't delved too deep. I know we're looking for it. We're looking for it to find better ways to be more efficient in our deliveries. Maybe get around traffic, or find routes that you pick up something because it's closer. I mean, you got to balance, hey, what I need that's going out versus how long it's been sitting in pickup, and where's the location of it. So we're looking for ways to really embrace that and use that technology to help us, but we haven't got there yet.
I'd say what's been, I guess, really clear to me from this conversation today is that this agility in rental isn't about buying more equipment, it's about eliminating this friction that we all encounter in this having to be so proactive in a reactive environment of rental, and removing friction not only within the store, but removing it across the holistic customer's rental experience as well. And that downtime's no longer a mechanical problem, it's probably more focused on this workflow discipline that we can now incorporate into digital tools. And that would have to be the main workflow win for all of us. And that's probably also why we're here at the ARA Show, that these conversations are happening in real time with what you're doing at Texada and SmartEquip, and then how it flows onto rental businesses like RP Rents. So I think we need to really focus and lean into these discussions and challenge the status quo, like you said, that potentially might have happened a few years ago, that everyone is starting to seamlessly work into augmenting a lot of these processes. But I think we really need to advise to a lot of the people listening in, seek advice from individuals that are leading in this space, whether they're on the show floor or others around the world, and kind of come together for a collective direction to empower the future of rentals. So guys, thank you for a thoughtful discussion. I really appreciate your time. Enjoy the show. I know you're going across to Con Expo as well soon, so enjoy Las Vegas, and thank you for your time.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you.